Hello everyone, my name is Elena Cifuentes and tonight I would like to share with you this experience. It is a very strange and terrifying thing that happened to me and my mother on a bus. You see, we don't travel much. We live alone since my father passed away a few years ago. Things were going well for me at work, so I decided to take my mother on a vacation to a magical town over a long weekend since there was a holiday. Excited, we bought bus tickets because we couldn't afford to travel by plane. The bus was scheduled to leave at 10 p.m. from the central station. We called a taxi that dropped us off at around 9:30 p.m., so we were making good time. When we got to the area where all the buses were, I started looking for the platform, as it's a very large station, and our ticket indicated that the bus would be at the last number, almost at the end of that huge place. There were almost no people around. In fact, there were very few people at the station itself. When we arrived, there was a group of people boarding a bus, and when it left, the station was quite empty. Suddenly, I saw our bus arrive. It parked where our ticket said it would, and when I checked the number, it matched our ticket as well. "Mom, get up, we're leaving," I told my mother, who had been sitting on a bench. Honestly, I was surprised that we were the only ones waiting there. There was no one else taking that bus, but I thought it might be because of the hour, so I didn't dwell on it, and we boarded the bus. The driver took our tickets and we settled into our seats. We had little luggage, so we put it in the compartments above the seats. It was only 9:40 p.m., so I thought we would wait there longer for the other passengers to arrive since buses always leave at the time stated on the ticket. But not this one. As soon as my mother and I sat down, I started feeling the bus move. We were already leaving. My mother joked that we were the only passengers and that she could snore without embarrassment when she slept, as it was going to be a long trip. But I felt something strange, like when you have a bad feeling. We hit the road and of course everything was completely dark outside, and the bus lights were off as well. We were sitting 2 seats behind the driver. My mother was just falling asleep when suddenly something woke her up. Out of nowhere, the man started laughing. A very strange laugh. My mother and I looked at each other and I peeked a little because I wanted to see if maybe he was talking on the phone or listening to something, but no. He was just laughing to himself. And then, some very old music, like from the 1920s or something, started playing loudly throughout the bus. The music was honestly quite disturbing. If I knew the name of the song, I'd tell you so you could listen to it, but it gave us chills. My mother told me she wouldn't be able to sleep with that loud music and the driver's laughter, which still hadn't stopped. I started feeling very scared because the situation was not normal at all. It was too unsettling. As if that weren't enough, I tried to turn on one of the screens that are off behind the seats to put on a movie and try to relax. But when I turned on the screen, I could see myself and my mother, in night vision. That's when I knew everything was wrong. We were being recorded, and we could see ourselves. There was a hidden camera somewhere on the bus pointing at us. That's when I quietly told my mother that something was wrong and that we needed to get out of there somehow. She, very scared, asked me how we were going to get off and where we would go since we were already on the highway. It was very dangerous to get off at night in that place completely alone, but I felt in every cell of my body that we were in much more danger up there. At 10:05 p.m., I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was a woman who said she was calling on behalf of the bus company from which we had bought the tickets. She called to tell me that the bus was waiting for us to depart, and that they would give us a 5-minute grace period to arrive. Otherwise, the bus would have to leave. My whole body started trembling. My mother looked at me worriedly, asking who it was, but I couldn't even speak. I told the woman what was happening. She asked me which bus we had boarded, and I replied that it was the same one on the ticket, the same platform and bus number. But she told me that was impossible because that platform was no longer in use. Only those departing from the terminal were in use. At that moment, while I was talking to her on the phone, the music stopped, and the driver stopped laughing. It was then that, with the woman still on the phone, I gathered the courage to get up from my seat, walk to the front and shout at the man to let us off because I was on the phone with the police. The man just smiled at me with very yellow teeth and his cynical, extremely unnatural smile. Without saying anything, he stopped and opened the bus door. I grabbed my mother's arm and without even retrieving our luggage, we ran off that bus. We were left stranded in the middle of nowhere, watching the bus drive into the woods and disappear there without coming back out. My mother and I started walking in the opposite direction. The lady on the phone tried to calm me down and told me she had already called the police, but I kept trembling, and my mother was on the verge of tears as well. I called a friend who immediately came to pick us up. Since we weren't too far from the city, we found a small grocery store and waited there. The owners were very kind and gave us water because I think they could see the fear and confusion on our faces. When my friend finally picked us up, I asked her to take us straight to the bus terminal because I wanted an explanation and to file a complaint about the experience we had been through. When we arrived, we went directly to the area of the company where we bought the tickets. The same woman I had spoken to on the phone was there, and she was very kind the whole time. I knew the problem wasn't with her, but I needed an answer. She told me she had already requested the camera recordings from the manager to understand what had happened since no bus enters or leaves that terminal without being monitored. In fact, the guard has to open the gate for them after confirming they are verified buses from the operating companies at that terminal. We waited a few hours until they finally took us to a small office where they had the recordings on a computer. But when they showed them to use, we had more questions than answers. In the recordings, my mother and I appeared walking to the last platform, where there was absolutely no one. But when we got there, my mom and I disappeared from the frame, as if we had been erased from the recording, and at no time did any bus arrive. Throughout the entire recording, that platform remained completely empty. There was also no record of any other unauthorized bus. All the buses entering and leaving at those hours in the recordings were verified and already en route with people on board. The same was true for those arriving, so there was no explanation. I noticed the employees' faces. They were as surprised as we were. They didn't know what had happened. They had no logical explanation to give us. All I wanted was to go home and take my mother, who was still very nervous. They refunded our money, though of course we never recovered our luggage. But the most important thing at that moment was that my mother and I were safe because we would never know what might have happened if we hadn't gotten off that bus. In short, it was a very, very strange experience. I can't tell you if it was something paranormal or some kind of hallucination that we both strangely experienced, but it all felt very real. Thank you for listening to our story. Good evening, everyone. Hello, good morning or evening, my name is Gerardo. I need to share this with someone despite still being afraid of what happened, and you'll soon understand why. This took place in the state of Veracruz, where a little over a year ago I was sent for work. I'm from Mexico City, and it was my first time visiting that beautiful state. I stayed there for a week, completed my job, and then it was time to return to the noisy Mexico City. My bus left at night, around 10:30 p.m., as it was the only direct bus I could find without many stops. But I didn't account for a small detour the bus had to take due to an accident involving several cars that blocked the way. The bus took another route, a road through mountains and trees, but it was still paved, so everything seemed normal to me at that point. I was listening to music and looking out the window. I remember how intimidating the silhouette of the mountains and the forest looked at night. I thought about the fear I would feel if I were walking alone there at night. My mind just wandered looking at the eerie landscape, and that's why I don't know if I attracted what happened to us, or if I just sensed it. I continued looking out the window. Most people were already asleep since the bus lights were off, and there were no other lights from cell phones or screens inside the bus. Everything was quite calm, when suddenly I noticed something outside, far away among the trees. I saw something burning. It looked like a fire, but as we got closer, I realized it was a large bonfire in the middle of the woods. And that's when I noticed there were people, as I saw silhouettes moving around the fire. But the most horrifying part was about to happen because as we passed by, I saw clearly how these people were naked, and there were several poles stuck in the ground, each over 2 meters high, and each one had dead animals impaled on them. The scene was quite grotesque. I looked with all the hair on my body standing on end because the people around the fire were performing some kind of ritual. Something very dark was happening in that place, there was no doubt about it. But the worst part was when they turned to look at us and I knew we probably wouldn't get out of there. At that moment I heard the driver speak through the speakers, asking everyone to close the curtains on all the windows and avoid looking outside, mentioning that we would soon return to the main road, that everything was fine. But in his voice you could hear the nervousness, as if he had to say it as a protocol to calm the passengers, but it seemed even he didn't know if we would really be okay. People obeyed, and we all closed the curtains, but then we started hearing banging on the bus, coming from outside. I couldn't help but peek a little to see what was happening, and I saw them, all those naked people, with grotesque smiles on their faces, surrounding the bus while banging on it. The driver had to slow down because they got in the way, and he didn't want to run anyone over, but they wanted to get in. They wanted us for seeing what we should never have seen. There were children on the bus who, upon hearing the banging and the horrible screams of those people, started crying and screaming in fear. I heard some women start to pray because they knew it was probably the only thing that could save us. I took my phone to call emergency services, but the call didn't go through as there was no signal in that area. I truly lost all hope at that moment. They were hitting the bus so hard I thought they would break a window and get in. But I saw the driver start to speed up more and more, and I saw the people outside getting angrier, with those eyes full of fury that I will never forget. It was pure evil. The driver accelerated until we lost sight of them. The people were still very scared, and the children wouldn't stop crying. The driver spoke again through the microphone, with a very agitated voice, saying that everything was fine now and that in less than 5 minutes we would be back on the main road. We continued our journey normally until we reached Mexico City. We were all still very scared, and I don't think anyone could sleep the entire way. When we got off the bus and went to collect my luggage, I saw the bus was stained with blood on the outside. There were handprints everywhere. It was truly terrifying to see that. We made it safely to the city, but I didn't know the nightmare would continue. For days I felt very physically and psychologically ill. I had stomach problems for over a week, couldn't keep food down, felt dizzy, and had severe headaches. Of course I went to the doctor, but he said he didn't know the cause of my condition since I didn't have any infection causing all those symptoms. Despite taking medication and injections, the illness wouldn't stop, until my wife said we had to go to church because she sensed my health issues were due to that incident that night. And she was right, because as soon as I went to church to confess and pray, I started to feel better and gradually recovered. I would have liked to know if the other passengers experienced the same thing as me, to be sure it was those people who caused it. But obviously, I don't have that information. I just hope everyone is okay. Well, I can say that I survived, and fortunately I am here to tell about it. Have a good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Marco, and this is my story. Before I begin, I want to clarify that I share this anecdote with much respect, and without any intention of offending anyone. What happened to me is not easy to tell, and even harder to believe. Sometimes I still question whether it really happened to me because it's very difficult for me to accept. Especially since, before this, I had never experienced any kind of paranormal or strange event. I'll start by telling you that I travel every weekend to see my family because I work in another city, a larger one with more job opportunities. This place is 4 hours away from my hometown, where my wife and children live, so every weekend, long weekend, and vacation, I go there to be with them. On this particular occasion, it was 2018. It was an ordinary Friday. and a coworker drove me to the bus station. My bus was scheduled to leave at 8 p.m., and I was there on time. We hit the road, and the bus always makes a stop in a small town along the way. It also picks up people outside a food stand, where there's a bus stop with benches for those waiting for the buses. About 6 people got on, among them a woman around 70 years old, who sat next to me. At first, she didn't say anything, not even good evening or anything. She simply sat in silence in the seat next to me. But as we were on our way, the woman started asking me if I knew where we were. I explained that we were heading to a certain city and that we still had about 3 hours left to get there. She just looked out the window and touched her head as if something was bothering her, or rather, as if she were desperate. I couldn't help but ask if she was okay, to which she replied that she was looking for her missing son. She had been searching for him for more than 4 years. She traveled along the border, visiting cities, towns, and even hills, any place where she received anonymous tips about where her son's body might be. I felt very sorry for her. I didn't know what to say. I felt terrible for her, and I could feel her sadness in her voice. I simply responded that I was very sorry and that I truly hoped she would find him soon, and that I would keep her in my prayers. She thanked me with a very warm voice, and after that she went to the bathroom. She took a long time in there. I thought she might be crying or something like that. But an hour passed, and the woman didn't come out of the bathroom, so I got worried. We were just arriving at another stop in a town, and I took the opportunity to go to the back and knock on the bathroom door where the woman still was. But when they opened the door, a young man came out. I asked him if there hadn't been a woman in the bathroom before him, but he said no, that when he entered, the bathroom was empty. I looked for the woman in all the seats, but she was nowhere to be found. After the few people at that stop got on, the bus moved on, and I never found out what happened to that woman, whom I never saw again. Months later, I was on my social media just passing the time when I suddenly saw a picture of a woman that caught my attention. She looked very familiar, and when I opened the post, I remembered it was her, that woman from the bus. She was in a post about searching mothers. They had made a tribute to her as it had been a year since she had been killed. The woman had been dead for a year, and I had seen her on the bus just 4 months before. A criminal gang had taken her off a bus while she was on one of her trips looking for her son, and since then, nothing had been known about her until her daughter found her body sometime later. I felt very emotional reading that post and knowing that the woman is still looking for her son, maybe not realizing that she is no longer in this world. Even so, she hasn't lost hope of being reunited with him. And you know something? Every night I pray for her eternal rest, and that she finally be reunited with her son. Thank you all for listening to this video. I hope you enjoyed the stories. Much more content is coming. Subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. Have a good evening, everyone. See you next.